His decision from the Supreme Court. Senator, good to have you. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Where do Republicans regroup now? What's the next step?
Well, first of all, let's be clear. I think it's pretty telling that for the Obama administration, a victory is a middle-class tax increase. And that's what this is. Not me saying it. That's what the Supreme Court has just said today. It's important to realize what the Supreme Court decides is not whether something's a good idea or not. What they decide is whether it's constitutional. And the reason why they say this is constitutional is because this is a tax increase. So for folks watching back home, here's what this means. This now means that if you don't buy health insurance, you are in unlawful compliance with the law, and the IRS can come after you and will come after you. We have now created an IRS problem for millions of Americans. Anyone who thinks that's good for economic growth is out of their minds.
Well, I understand you might think it's not good for economic growth. I'm not hearing you say that it's unconstitutional.
Well, first of all, I continue to believe that it is, but I'm not on the Supreme Court. So here's the bottom line now. It is constitutional according to the Supreme Court because it's a tax increase. We have to live with the consequences of this now. By the way, there are a lot of things that are constitutional that happen to be bad ideas, and this just joins the list because now millions of Americans will have an IRS problem beginning in 2014. And we just came out with numbers today, less than 2% growth and anemic economic growth. And you watch today the numbers on the market, you watch the economic reaction to that, it'll be negative because people do not think this is good news. Creating an IRS problem for millions of Americans is not good news.
Forgive me, Senator, isn't the penalty around $95? Ultimately, isn't that the starting penalty? That would seem quite small to a lot of people.
No, first of all, as the years go on, the number begins to increase. But the bigger point is that now Americans who are out of compliance, they have to prove to the IRS they have health insurance. If you don't have it, they're going to chase you. They're going to take away your refund. They're going to increase your tax next year. How is that good news for anyone? And not to mention, by the way, that this is a broken promise. Barack Obama said he would not be raising taxes on the middle class. This is exactly what this is. When he told George Stephanopoulos on ABC a few years ago that this was not a tax increase, he obviously didn't know what he was talking about because his lawyers before the Supreme Court argued that it was a tax increase, and today the Supreme Court affirmed that.
Republicans have spent 2 years trying to mount this challenge. A loss in court today. How long does the repeal effort go if the votes don't go your way in the early days? This vote supposedly set for mid-July. Will this effort continue into infinity, or is there a point at which you say it's the law of the land, let's move on?
Well, I think that you always try to get rid of bad ideas, no matter how long it's been on the books. And that's what I intend to do as long as I serve in the United States Senate, is do everything I can to ensure that this middle-class tax increase doesn't go into effect and doesn't hurt economic growth in America. But here's what I expect is going to happen, I hope. I hope that there are Democrats in the U.S. Senate that will say that while they agree with all of us that we do have a health insurance problem in America, they never intended to create an IRS problem for millions of Americans, which is now what millions of Americans are going to have beginning very soon. This was never what anyone wanted, I hope, and I hope that we'll have a chance to redo this thing in the right way, not this way.
Finally, some political watchers are saying this is going to alter the way the Romney campaign is going to spend its political fuel. It was largely about jobs. Healthcare is going to take a big part of the oxygen in the room. Is that true?
Well, I think this is going to become a big issue again. It always has been, but I think the focus will be back on it as Americans in practical terms now realize that the IRS is going to be, they're now going to have to prove to the IRS that they have health insurance, or they're going to get hit with a penalty and they're going to have an IRS problem. So I do think that issue, as it hurts our economy, as it hurts the unemployment figures, as it hurts economic growth, that you're going to hear more and more about this on the campaign trail. No doubt this now becomes one of the main things this election is all about.
And Senator, could this be viewed by Republicans as a silver lining? Does this reinvigorate support for the Republicans, seeing that there are several polls out indicating that a plurality of Americans did not agree with the individual mandate?
Well, you know, I try not to analyze it that way. I love my country more than I love my political party, and I think this is bad for America and bad for our economy. After all this noise about how this affects the campaign, there are millions of people out there that are already struggling. This is one more thing we've now put on their back. I think this is terrible. I just do. I just don't think this is the right way to deal with this issue. I wish reasonable minds would prevail.
So to be clear, sir, the fact that 30 or 40 million more Americans might come into health care is a bad thing in your view because of the way that it's paid for?
Well, I think that we all want Americans to have more choices in terms of health insurance, and I've never denied, I don't think anyone does, that we have a health insurance problem in America. But I don't think you solve that problem by growing the debt, by taking choices away from people, by trying to force states to deficit spend in order to put people on their Medicare rolls, and by turning the IRS into an enforcement mechanism for health insurance. That's just not the right approach. And I think that we're going to see the impacts of that here very soon, unfortunately.
Before we let you go, Senator, it is going to put the onus on Republicans to offer alternatives on the number of uninsured, cost escalation, pre-existing conditions. Will the party introduce new ideas, or do you see a vote being a vote on the same ideas Republicans have already put on the table?
Well, first of all, I campaigned on new ideas with regards to health insurance, and I'll continue to talk about those. I think Americans should be able to buy health insurance the way their employers do, without having to pay taxes on that money. I think you should be able to buy insurance from any company in America that will sell it to you. I think small businesses should be able to partner up with other small businesses. And by the way, I think we should try to figure out ways to incentivize tort reform at the state level. These are all important measures. And I, by the way, believe that there's a role for government to play in high-risk pools to help insure people that are chronically ill and are going to have a difficult time finding private insurance because of that. These are all things that I hope we can talk about in a reasonable way, but we don't have to sick the IRS on people in order to do that. I think that's the fundamental problem we face today.
Senator, very good having you today. Appreciate you taking some time to talk to us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Senator Marco Rubio joining us.